Welcome to Why Nonfiction Book Proposals Often Fail, which has offered a critique opportunity to everyone who's attending. I did get a large number of proposals. More than 60 people submitted pretty much their full proposal for potential critique. I'm going to try and talk about as many as I can, but obviously there are limitations. We've only got a little over an hour, but I hope the information is useful to you regardless of whether or not your specific proposal is mentioned. Before we dive into the material, I just want to say thank you to this month's sponsor, Heather Davis. For those who don't know, I have a free newsletter. It's called Electric Speed. It comes out every 2 weeks, and every issue carries a sponsor. So Heather Davis is an editor, and she's running a free 4-hour workshop coming up within the next month. And you can register for that free workshop at the link you see on the screen, or you can take a picture of the slide, take a picture of the QR code, and that will take you to that link. So thank you, Heather, for sponsoring my newsletter and these free sessions. Okay, so for those who might not be familiar with my background, I spent the first part of my career at a traditional publishing house. The name of it was F&W Media. Sadly, it's no longer in business. It was sold for parts some years ago, but both Mark and I worked there. That's how we met originally. We were co-workers first, then we got romantically involved, and then we became co-workers again. So while I was at F&W Media, I oversaw the publication of hundreds of nonfiction books. Here, I'm just showing you a tiny, tiny selection of some of the books that we published. Some of you are familiar with the Writer's Digest books that I was heavily involved with. We did books like the Breakout Novel Workbook, Page After Page by Heather Sellers, the 3 a.m. Epiphany, a favorite of mine. I also acquired more pop culture type books for a design line. So we did a compendium of found grocery lists called Milk, Eggs, Vodka. We did zombie haiku when zombies were popular. And we also did very practical books, prescriptive nonfiction. So I was also working on Northlight art and craft books. One of the first books I worked on was how to craft a heritage album. We did books on how to coach youth sports. And then towards the end of my time at F&W, I worked with John Warner, an author you might know, to do humor books. We did a humor line together. So long story short, I've dabbled in a lot of nonfiction categories. I've seen a lot of proposals over the years. And I tend to have pretty strong opinions about what book proposals should do. And in fact, this is very meta, I worked on the book proposal book by Michael Larson, a literary agent, How to Write Book Proposals, which is a great guide, should you be looking for one. It's continually updated. So I was the editor on one of those editions. So I have opinions, and that's what we're here to talk about. The first thing I want to discuss is title. Now, I think we all know that titles get changed. They get changed by the publisher. Certainly, if you have an agent, they may have opinions on the title, and they may want to tweak the title or the subtitle. When I think about titling for book proposal purposes, I'm mainly thinking about what is going to create absolute clarity about what you're writing and selling, clarity about your position, what's going to attract attention, and what's going to help you stand out, knowing, of course, that it could get changed. So I tend to avoid anything that's vague, broad, unclear, overly clever, or it doesn't otherwise match the tone and voice or purpose of the book. Sometimes this gets overthought, especially at proposal stage. I'm not going to say that your project, you're going to make it or break it based on the title alone, but you can certainly make a great first impression by having a title that tells and sells. That's a little phrase that comes from Michael Larson, the literary agent. He always talks about titles that tell and sell. And so I think that's a good rule of thumb. Now, to show you what I mean about the tell and sell title, what I did is I took the title of the memoir proposals that were submitted, and I put all of the titles onto a single slide. And I'm doing this because I would like you in the chat to pick one title that you see that you would read first. you might be interested in several of these when you look at the titles, but what is the one you would pick up first or that you think you would buy first based on the title alone? Okay, are you ready? Again, I want you to put the name of the book in the chat. Here they are. I'm just going to give you a second to read them and put your answer into the chat. No One Grows Up in Vegas. Boy, it's moving so fast. Lots of people here. Okay. Under the Mulberry Tree. Bliss Found, Blood Ivory. Unlocked is getting mentioned quite a bit. Blood Ivory. No One Grows Up in Vegas. Okay. I think there's definitely some themes here. I think there's some ones that are coming to the top in terms of being mentioned frequently. Mulberry Tree is one of them. Blood Ivory is another. Unlocked, and the Vegas book. Let me say, off the top, there is no right or wrong answer here. So much about book publishing is subjective. Agents and editors are subjective. They're going to be the first ones to tell you that. And, we tend to respond to things that match something in our histories or our identities or what we know we enjoy. For me, looking at this list with my experiences, especially as an editor, the one that jumps out at me, or the two that jump out at me, are Love Feats, a memoir of dumplings and divorce on the Silk Road. It sparks my curiosity. And No One Grows Up in Vegas, a memoir, because it really sparks my curiosity because I can guess at what that might mean for the book. I don't know until I start reading the proposal though. So that's a title that makes me really want to dig into the proposal and see what that means and what story is behind that. Similarly for the memoir of dumplings and divorce on the Silk Road. I love travel, especially travel narratives about Asia. So that really appeals to me. So again, no right or wrong answers here, but of course, authors, those of you who have a title on the slide, I think it's really useful to do this exercise because you don't always know, obviously, what's in the submission pile next to your own book. And agents and editors are looking at often many projects at a time. And so when you line them all up together, is yours standing out next to these others? And the title is one of the ways that our projects stand out from the very start. So to clarify, these are just the memoirs. I think that memoirists struggle more with titles than other types of nonfiction. And we're going to talk, and I'm going to show you the ways that I think that they struggle. Okay, so these titles in particular, I think are very abstract, or they're broad, or you might say they are metaphorical. I can't tell by the title alone what these stories are about. They don't necessarily spark my curiosity. It's just too general for me to start asking questions yet. So we have Unlocked, although many of you mentioned that in the chat. Maybe there's enough there for you to sink your teeth into. You're curious about that riddle. Not Without a Fight, a memoir of resilience. Again, I would want more information out of that title, more specificity, and then Safe and Sound. I don't even think there was a subtitle on that one. I have no idea what that might be until I read the proposal, of course. There are a few titles here that for my taste, they might, for my market taste, let's say, I think they might cross the line into the too specific. But again, this is very subjective. So The Cost of Belonging, breaking free from the notorious cult here. I don't even know how to pronounce that. I'm not familiar with this cult. Now, there may be certain people who are. Maybe the publishers you're pitching to would absolutely know who this cult is, but somehow I have remained ignorant of it. So I'm just wondering, do we want to be that specific about it? And I'm going to suggest a different title in a minute. The Bliss Found, we get a list of things in the subtitle about the book, the yoga, the I'm going to get tongue-tied on that, BDSM and alternative therapies. Sometimes when we list so many things, it feels like the book doesn't have a focus. So you have to be really careful when you do that. I have a suggestion for that title as well, an alternative title. And then Under the Mulberry Tree, Making Sense of My Father's Electrocution. I happen to know, I knew something about this book, and I knew exactly what book it was when it came through, because I've done some work with that author. And my sense of it, or what I remember most of all about this book, isn't necessarily the manner of death, but the discoveries about the death that were so shocking for the author. So is the manner of death really the selling point here, is the question I would be asking. Although the main title itself, of course, is very evocative and beautiful. With memoir in particular, you want the title to suggest what sets apart your version of this universal story. So memoir always has that balancing act of specificity and universality. So the titles that I have here in bold echo some memoirs, themes, issues, and memoirs that I've seen a lot on the market. So anything having to do with living in an oppressive society or country, breaking free from cults. This has had a moment. I don't know if the moment is continuing, but certainly I've watched Netflix series about cults. One Girl's Journey of Healing. Healing is another theme and topic that's very prevalent right now, being pitched in memoirs. So how is yours going to be different? Becoming an American Woman, very broad, universal theme, but what's specific about yours? I know what I'm asking for is challenging. Hopefully we want that to come through in the title itself. And then finally, the memoir of trauma and truth, themes that are very prevalent in memoirs published today. Why do we need this version of this story? None of these titles are things you would get rejected on solely. I'm just looking for ways to improve that initial first impression. So here are some suggestions for those that I pulled out earlier. Even though I love Love Feats as it is, with it's really the subtitle that does it for me, that really clarifies or gets my curiosity going. As I digged more into that particular proposal, I thought there could be a better title for this than Love Feats, which to me is very, very general. What about The Dumpling Cure? Because it's about making dumplings, at least in part, finding comfort on the Silk Road. And I think that would really inspire me to travel. It is a travel memoir. Blood Ivory, I would love to see the subtitle be stronger. So Blood Ivory, Saving Elephants in Communist China. I think that more or less accurately captures the thrust of the storytelling. The cult book, instead of mentioning the specific cult, how about mentioning one of the euphemisms I think the cult was known by, Tender Loving Care, or maybe that was the actual name, I can't recall now, but Tender Loving Care. So those in the know, that will send a signal. They will know what that is, that it's the cult. Tender Loving Care, Escaping the Most Dangerous Cult in the World, which I gathered from the proposal, this is what sets this cult apart, that it is in fact the most dangerous. And that's a very powerful way to set your story apart from others. And then finally, with Bliss Found, I came up with this title before even delving into the author's other work. And I found that she had a journal with a very similar title, if not identical title. So it's really good, Yoga and Kink. Yoga and Kink, Finding Joy Through Ritualistic Pain. I think that really encapsulates the main experience you're likely to get, or benefit, or journey that you're going to go on in that particular memoir. Okay, so moving on from the title, I can't emphasize enough that when you're pitching a nonfiction book, it has to be for someone specific. We talk, of course, about ideal readers, like you want to have that ideal reader in your head that you're writing to, and that's great, but I'm not necessarily even talking about the ideal reader. I'm talking about very specific readerships who have specific problems or needs or habits or ways that they like to be entertained. So when you write a proposal, one of the signs that you have not successfully honed in on that ideal reader or a very specific target readership is if you use the collective we, and if you use it from the very start. As we see in this proposal, this is for a book titled Being You. And what I'm sharing here is, the opening paragraphs of the proposal in the overview section. And notice it just immediately goes into we in the third sentence. We become an algorithm. We are the algorithm. We are conditioned. But who is we here? Especially if I don't already know the authors, I don't know who that is. It's not telling me who the specific reader is. And it's a cliche perhaps, but it's a cliche worth repeating. A book for everybody is a book for nobody. So we have to get laser specific on who this we is, and it has to be clear in the opening paragraphs of that overview. The other thing that can happen is because you're trying so hard to convince an agent or publisher that there is an audience for this book, you indicate too many audiences, and then that can send a mixed message. So there was a book proposal called Garden Envy, Creating Beautiful Tour-Ready Landscapes, which I think is a great title. And the overview mentions, while there are manuals on landscape design, books on proper plant selection and entertainment, and let me start that again. While there are manuals on landscape design, books on proper plant selection, and entertainment guides, there is no single source that combines all three with a focus on producing tour-ready gardens. So this kind of indicates this is a book for people who are trying to prepare a tour-ready garden. Gardening is a popular hobby, expanding to new participants. Oh, so you're trying to reach people who are new to gardening? Then with the pandemic behind us, garden tours have returned as a fundraising tool for nonprofit organizations. So now we have another audience, nonprofit organizations, potentially, not just the gardener, but organizations. Then the overview segues into a discussion, very general discussion about how many households garden, but surely we don't mean to say that all of those households are going to really want to do a tour-ready garden. I mean, Mark and I have a very small garden. No one is ever going to tour it. So, there's this is the kind of a classic example of just reaching out to too many different potential audiences. You want to be very disciplined and decide, okay, this book is primarily for X, and don't try to go beyond that. Although certainly in the section of your proposal where you talk about the readership or the target market, you might say, this could also appeal almost as a postscript. This could also appeal to these other people, but these are really the number one people who are going to love this book. The other thing that happens here, and we're going to see this later, is that the book has an emphasis on a specific part of the United States, and it's kind of indicated here. The gardening population is thickest below the Mason-Dixon, with a third of gardeners in the South. So that's yet another kind of audience segment. So I hope you see how there's some mixed messages here, because maybe the author is trying to indicate how many different people are going to enjoy this, but this is actually counterproductive. Here is the opening, part of the opening for the Everyday Bento Cookbook. And here we have a really well-defined readership. We're already into the proposal a little bit. And it's clear that this book is for healthy, vegetarian-leaning cooks and intuitive eaters, which is, if you're in the cookbook, healthy eating, space, if you're a publisher or agent who works in this space, then this is going to resonate with you. You're going to say, yes, this is an identifiable audience. And so, not to say that this is what the proposal stamped on the cover. This is what came through to me as I read the overview, which notes, for those curious about intuitive eating principles described by these authors, enthusiastic readers of this book, Everyday Bento will delight eaters with its practical framework for creating healthy, satisfying meals without sacrificing flavor or enjoyment. And then we get a little bit more about how it's for readers who are already interested in the basic principles of healthy eating. You're not trying to convert people into healthy eating, but they're looking for a reliable structure to make delectable and diverse vegetable-forward meals. So this is very, I think, it really pinpoints who's going to fall in love with this book. Another proposal, The Art of Parenting While Sick, did a great job of being disciplined about who the readership is. And it was right there baked into the overview in the opening page of the proposal. parents with chronic health conditions. That's who this book is for. Notice that it's also expressed in the title. We don't even need the subtitle to understand who this book is for. I love it when that happens. And then the overview immediately cuts to the chase. You know, parents worry. We worry this is going to happen or that's going to happen. But parents with chronic health conditions worry about all these things and a whole lot more. And so even though we get into the collective we here, we know who the we is. And so it works in this scenario. All right. Sometimes proposals, or you, the author, you'll get so passionate about the material that you're writing about, your topic, the figure that you're investigating, the hobby, whatever it happens to be. You want to tell people all about it. You want to tell people what's in the book. But that is a classic mistake. Instead, you have to focus on the market questions. The market questions are very simple, not always simple to answer, but they are, so what, who cares, and who are you? Those are the three market questions. So it's not what the book is about. It's about, why do we care what's in this book? Why do we care what it's about? So there was a really fascinating proposal submitted, Just As I Am, The Life and Times of Bill Withers, which is a biography of Bill Withers. Now, I'm not into music like my husband is, but I know who Bill Withers is. So like, I don't, it's just, I feel like a lot of people probably do, and it might be a surprise to them that there is no biography. And so rather than talk about Bill Withers and say he's fascinating and confounding, I don't know that you have to say that. You can say, once we get down further, they say Bill Withers deserves a thorough biography, one that carefully and accurately examines him, his world, and his work. You almost don't have to convince anyone of that because Bill Withers is a known entity. This implies in the overview that one does not exist. Now, I don't know. I had to go research this to find out. Is this, in fact, going to be the first biography of Bill Withers? Wow. No one has written that yet. We don't get necessarily that up front. We're not told about that, but it is strongly implied. And then they say the story, is a probing, encyclopedic and long overdue account of the life of Bill Withers. We need more of those bold types of statements or discussions. We need elaboration on that. We don't necessarily need to be sold on Bill Withers as an important person. So this is the question or questions that an agent or publisher are going to have. What other biographies are out there? And why do we need this one? So I did find that there was one. It doesn't look like it was by a major publisher, but I could be mistaken. I mean, it looks perfectly respectable. I don't know what its failings are, but I bet the authors of this proposed book know what its failings are and have been hinting at it. Then the next question is, okay, if we do need this biography, why are you the ones to be writing it? And that can be a really tough question to answer, especially if you're pursuing this out of personal, just personal motivation. You aren't necessarily known for writing music biographies. You haven't been reporting on Bill Withers. You don't necessarily, a publisher or agent wouldn't immediately associate with you, oh, yes, you are the perfect person to write this. So you have to make that case. Do you have new or special information about Bill Withers that has never before been released? Because that's something you're going to mention up front in that overview. And also very important, this ties into number 2, how can you, the authors, reach the readers for this book? Because publisher will care deeply about that question. So that's what I mean by focusing on the market questions instead of the content of the book. All right, there was another proposal that had some fascinating pieces to it, beyond burnout recovery. But as soon as I saw the word burnout in the title, I was like, oh, this book is too late for the market, because burnout kind of had its moment about 4 years ago. I'll get to that in a second. So the overview begins, this book is a self-help for 30 to 60-year-old adults who are experiencing burnout and haven't been able to find their way back to previous levels of productivity and satisfaction. It's for people for whom the traditional or mainstream approaches haven't worked. Then it goes through some other discussion about burnout, and then talks about how it's a fact of life for most working adults. But notice how we're starting to broaden the audience here rather than hone in on exactly who is going to love this book. And we have to really pay attention here to the fact that there are so many comparable or competitive books on the market about burnout by people who have really significant platforms and expertise. I'm not saying the proposal author doesn't have it, but I'm just saying competition is stiff. And I don't know how much people are still interested in books on this topic. Or if, let's say, let me adjust that and say, I don't know if publishers are convinced there's still room in the market for more books on this topic. So you have to come with something, you have to come with a twist, something fresh, something that is going to help them overcome some initial resistance to the topic. So I like the author's idea that this book is for people, that it's going to help them people solve a problem that the usual methods haven't worked. And we're going to look for counterintuitive ways to address this. So a couple of the things that she mentions is that the book focuses on autistic or neurodivergent burnout, but she doesn't necessarily hit that really strongly in the opening. Again, she's trying to open the funnel really widely rather than say, this is who I'm really trying to benefit. If that is the case, own it. Don't apologize for going more narrow. And then the other element that was very interesting about this was the focus on an approach of eco-psychology. So the proposal mentions this book offers the useful metaphor of wildfire and the way the landscape recovers following fire as a form of imaginal roadmap for readers. This metaphor works well for both types of burnout recovery and is original, beautiful, and full of hope. I thought that was a really nice way of explaining why this book, why is it different? And so I would double down on one or both of those, and maybe the two things work hand in hand to make the book stand out. There was a proposal for a YA, a young adult biography in verse for Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, I love Eleanor Roosevelt, maybe because I recently watched a documentary about the Roosevelts. This was, by the famous documentarian, Ken Burns. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. I just came away, I was just blown away because I didn't really have much knowledge of Eleanor Roosevelt before watching that documentary. So I am on board for this book. However, I do not want to be told in the proposal opening that Eleanor was an amazing person. I think most people in publishing, even if they don't know all of the details, do recognize that, yes, there could be a successful YA biography about her, but why is it in verse? And what else is out there? So those are some of the market questions that we need to address. And I don't know that, FDR's 12-year presidency remains a popular topic. Like, that's not enough. Like, we need to go beyond that in terms of what the market demand might be. So the questions an agent or publisher will have if you want to speak to the market demand: is there demand for YA biographies of people during this time period? I have no idea, but it's something that you could research. Are there comparable YA biographies in verse that have done well? And why should this story be told in verse? I don't know. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but that's part of the case that you have to make. And then why is Eleanor Roosevelt relevant to today's teenager? Because this is YA, it's meant for that audience. So you need to be talking about her life in terms that that age group today is going to relate to. Now, sometimes in people's proposals, this can happen throughout the proposal, overview, comparable titles, target market. You have to be really careful of calling out unique features in your book if you can't prove there's actually market demand for them. So the question I'm asking it, like, is this really a unique selling position, or have you just made it into one, even though readers don't care either way? So for the bento cookbook, I think it has a lot going for it. And it mentions two pieces of information. One, It's the only English language cookbook to offer sake pairings. So it's going to provide a one-of-a-kind dining experience. Well, okay, I don't know if there's great demand for this sort of a cookbook to have that. You're going to have to prove it to me that this is actually going to make the book sell. Is the book not going to sell if it doesn't have sake pairings? Don't know. And so it feels kind of tossed in. Although there's certainly some authorship issues here where there's expertise in that topic. So maybe they felt like, well, it certainly doesn't hurt. Let's put it in there. And so I don't have a problem. Like, I don't think it's hurting anything, but I think it's, you don't want to make your case for something. Agents and publishers can see through this sort of thing when they're like, that's not going to make more people buy the book. It might, but you have to make that argument. Okay. So the other piece, a unique selling position here, the proposal mentions how the book will be divided into 3 sections: rice bentos, noodle bentos, and grain-free bentos, which really caught my attention because, there's so many people on diets now that are restrictive. And so it talks about, how it's going to pay attention to substitute options for those with dietary restrictions. Now, that does seem, just based on my knowledge of this market, that could be really important for getting people to buy the book. Sake, I don't know. You'll have to prove it to me. Maybe it's because I don't like sake. Maybe that's really the problem here. Okay. So I have a little metaphor or analogy to draw. Mark and I have been recently wrestling with our phone plan options. And this gets back to, is this really a unique selling proposition? Or are you just throwing it in there? And I was reading through the plan benefits for this, and I started laughing at the things that they were putting into the bucket. They're going to give me Apple TV Plus. They're going to give me a 1-year AAA membership. They're going to give me free stuff every week. And, it's like, that is not like a 10th, a 100th as important as like the hotspot data or the Mexico and Canada or the high-speed data and texting while abroad. Like, free stuff every week. Come on, really? I've already got Netflix without ads. I certainly don't need your plan with ads. I've actually already have Apple Plus TV. Although the one thing I am interested in here is the unlimited in-flight connection, because I do happen to spend a lot of money on in-flight Wi-Fi. So, okay, thumbs up on that one. So this is I hope this helps see, like, when people, whether it's readers, agents, or editors, think about all of the things that your book offers them in a list. What are the things they'll look at and be like, yeah, that's not really that important to me. That's not selling me on the book. And be disciplined in your proposal about what really matters, what people will really, really talk about when they recommend your book or write a review for it. Okay, so now we come to one of the important market questions, which is, who are you? Why should you write this book? And you have to help agents and editors connect the dots here, especially if they don't already know who you are or if they haven't solicited your material. So there was a proposal submitted for Butcher of the Balkans. And I found out while researching this book actually has already been published in the UK. I think the authors may be looking for a US publisher to take it on. That's my guess. In the author section, so this is about the author in the proposal, Judy Piercy's full bio is exactly what you see there. It was basically one paragraph. And my jaw dropped because I had already kind of looked around at the person she was writing about and found her website. And I was like, this doesn't do Judy justice, like not even a little bit. And so you really need to toot your own horn here. And I've indicated how I would revise. This is directionally not final by any means. Judy Piercy spent however many years at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, winning Canada's top investigative journalism award, in addition to a lot of other awards, I might add. She produced Canada's flagship morning show. She created documentaries for a national audience. She's obviously a really well-connected person, I would have to guess, and she should be name dropping all through this bio. And then I would also mention all of the time spent. So you want your bio to connect to the project that you're proposing. So for this book, Piercy connected more than 300 hours of interviews with David Whitelaw, he's one of the subjects of the book, and others who were part of his social circle, and the Jewish Defense League, and friends and family members. So like all of these, and a publisher knows this is going to help immensely with marketing and promotion. You don't even have to tell them, although you will tell them in the marketing and promotion section. But in the author bio, you're going to start to get them very excited about the potential for your network or the power of your relationships because of where you've been and what you've done. So Judy, do not undersell yourself. That needs to be more than a paragraph. I would say for someone of Judy's stature, like, I mean, she's had a very long career. You know, you could go 2 pages double spaced, maybe even longer. A paragraph is not enough. And I would say that for every book proposal, generally, you're about the author, you're probably shooting for 1 to 2 pages double spaced. Here's another one. This is for a book called Mastro Manipulator. It's about the collapse of an auction house related to sports. And the original bio, again, it's hardly a paragraph, someone with a long career in trade publications. And we just don't get much to sink our teeth into there. So I think this author needs to discuss the specific research he's conducted, give us a sense of your network, the interviews you've done, as I indicated with Judy's, that especially the work that no one else has done. I think for this book in particular, it would be really helpful to talk in the about the author and elsewhere in the proposal about placing an essay or article, you know, that shows media interest in this. This topic, you know, I'm not in the sports side of things, so it's really hard for me to say how much this is known, how much interest there is. But if you're going to convince an agent or a publisher, they would be reassured if you had an article or something somewhere that kind of shows that it sparked discussion, that it got shared in certain places, and that to show evidence of need for more. And then again, just reiterating, if you can name the insiders or veterans in this community, in this sports auction house community, it's going to help convince agents and publishers that you're going to be able to market and promote the book once it's published. For memoir, I know that the bio can be a little bit more tough because we're all an expert on our own lives. You know, you don't have to prove that, of course. But you do want to show that, let's say you're an active literary citizen, or that you have some resources available to you, or that you're starting to build visibility for the issues that are discussed in the book. And for No One Grows Up in Vegas, I thought Sarah did this beautifully. So Sarah talks about how she is an advocate helping to save lives by inspiring audiences to pursue genetic engineering. The book is about Tay-Sachs, which she gets to here in the bio. So her memoir is based on an article about coping with her younger sister's death from Tay-Sachs disease. You know, just as I recommended earlier, Sarah has already done it. She placed Dancing with My Sister in Jewish Chicago Magazine. This led to other opportunities. She started speaking about the importance of carrier screening. She's partnered with organizations to raise awareness. She published something on Huffington Post that got a lot of views. She created a TikTok to further promote the piece. So this is what we want to see. You know, Sarah is making waves already before the book even has a publisher. And she's doing things that all indicate she is on a successful trajectory. So this is the sort of, for memoirists, this is this kind of the ideal sort of bio that you would want. All right, moving on to the comparable or competitive titles. There's no right or wrong here. You can call it whichever you like. Everyone knows what you mean by it. So you want to choose the comparable titles to show that you really know the market for your book, like you know what your readers are already aware of or might buy instead of or in addition to your book. And you know, you don't want to choose books just for the sake of filling out the list, because it might mislead as to what your book really is or who it is for. So you have to be thoughtful here. The Garden Envy book, which I mentioned earlier about creating beautiful tour-ready landscapes, this isn't the full list of competitive titles, but for illustration purposes, I just picked out the most relevant. She mentions titles that I think could be comparable, but there is a little bit of confusion that's sown, no pun intended, with a couple of the choices here. So, in the opening of the proposal, which you saw a little bit of, she's positioning it for a mixed set of people. We had the nonprofit organizations, we had new gardeners, we had people who want to have tour-ready gardens, and then there was that later emphasis on Southeast. So her competitive title selection also kind of runs the gamut, unfortunately. So this causes more confusion about, okay, but really, which segment are you shooting for? So for those who don't know, Rizzoli is a coffee table book publisher. They do really high-end books at high prices. It is not going to teach you to do anything. It's just going to be beautiful pictures. That's it. That's what they do. That's what they're known for. It's aspirational. Most of us will never have a garden that looks like what's in the Rizzoli book. It's just juicy fun. Okay, so I don't think that's really a comp title. And then we've got the Fox Chapel book, which might or might not be a comp title or an appropriate comp title, let's say. So I would not include it if she is hoping that gardeners across the country are going to pick up her book. And she does admit in the proposal, she's picking plants or suggesting things that are for the Southeast. Well, then yes, this comp should stay. But if she's intending for lots of people beyond the Southeast to buy the book, then this is not appropriate for the list. The other two I thought were really well chosen, regardless of what direction she goes in, because it's about, how to have a big impact with the choices you make. One's about small budgets, which I don't think is a deal breaker by any stretch. And then I think the Norton book for $30 is probably the closest in nature to what I think the author is going for. So just make sure that when you line up your titles, and in fact, I would recommend this exercise, put the covers onto a bulletin board, look at the price points of each, look at the reputation of the publishers and the sorts of books they do. Do these all fit together and tell the story you want to tell about your book? Because ideally, we want the reader to potentially be interested in both your book and the comps that you're mentioning. If you're throwing a book in there that your ideal reader would never consider, you're just diluting your argument or the business case for your book. On the memoir side, I know this can get a little bit tricky. There was a proposal for Good Eye, Bad Eye, a memoir of trauma and truth. This is about a childhood injury or trauma. And there were a range of comparable titles mentioned. These were, I think, the first three that were mentioned. And one of these stands out a lot. The one in the middle. Salman Rushdie's just released memoir about the attack. I don't think you can put that into your comp listing for all sorts of reasons. First, it's Salman Rushdie. Second, he had a publicized attack that, due to a fatwa that has been out for decades, and it was when he's an adult. And I think that's a very different scenario than the other two books that are presented here, which are right on the mark, as far as I can tell, since I haven't read the memoir. I think it's interesting. The authors of the two memoirs on the ends, Stephanie Fu and Florence Williams, they're pretty well-established people. Fu is the radio producer for This American Life, or was. And then for Florence Williams, this was not her first book. It might have been her third even. And her first book was really well received, called Breasts. She's a science journalist. So this heartbreak book is actually what we would call, say, a hybrid memoir, memoir plus. It's as much scientific reporting about what happens when your heart breaks, like what happens when you go through a divorce or a really bad breakup, like what happens in your body. And then there's also her personal story woven in. So to this author, I would just say, make sure that the way that, just if you are weaving in journalism, science journalism, doing research, then heartbreak is an appropriate comp to choose. But if you're not, then it would be less relevant. Let's talk about platform and ultimately the marketing and promotion plan that you put into your book proposal. So this is how you show to the agent or publisher you're going to reach readers with existing assets, not future, existing. So there was a proposal for How to Die Well, a workbook for the living. What you're seeing right now is the entirety of the marketing and promotion or PR section, it's too short. I would say on average, you should have enough to fill about 2 to 4 double-spaced pages. If you go longer, that is not a problem. No one is going to fault you for going long on marketing and promotion ideas. And so this is really condensed with some facts. Some of them could be very important and helpful, but there's just not enough information here to give us an idea if you'll be successful marketing and promoting your book. So if I were expanding this, I would start thinking about it in terms of different buckets that you're trying to fill to the best of your ability. You might not be able to fill every one of these buckets, and most proposals don't, but you need to do some brainstorming under each section. Now, these aren't the actual titles that you would use in the book proposal. We're going to see some examples later of like better titles. This is just the way I like to think about it in terms of marketing. So you have your own media, like your own website, your own newsletter, your own podcast, etc. And you can talk about that and how you're going to use it to market and promote the book. The Substack here with 1,000 subscribers is a great start. I don't know how much it'll help because the posts are only monthly, and anyone who's in the newsletter or blogging business knows monthly is not going to move the needle. So also probably even less to this author's advantage, the posts don't tie directly into the book's topic. So that's, as soon as an agent or publisher sees that, they're going to discount the power of the Substack to do anything for the book. There was also very little notes activity. So that's like the social media layer on Substack. So, you know, this just tells me this person isn't necessarily engaged on Substack. They're not doing all of the community things I would expect if they were really invested in Substack. And so that makes me discount it as a marketing and promotion vehicle. This is not a call to action to get more active on Substack. It's only one method out of many that you could take. All I'm saying is that this part is not particularly convincing for a marketing plan, not yet. You can certainly mention your website, but if your visits are very small, like she has fewer than 100 visits per month, it's not meaningful, right? I don't know that there's a correct number to wait for, but it would be nice if you were at least in the 5 figures per month. If your traffic's not impressive, don't mention it. With social media, you can talk about, you know, the places that you're active, but I would also describe the activity a little bit. You know, what sorts of things are you posting? Who are you engaging with? Do you have any analytics to share? Like, do you mostly reach the sort of people who would buy your book? You talk about that. If you have a particular content strategy you're pursuing, you should talk about that. If you are doing guest blogging, if you're writing for other publications, if you're regularly in view on someone else's turf, I would call this shared media. And so you want to mention that. She mentioned she's a guest blogger, 21,000 visits per month. That's much better in terms of traffic. But how often is she a guest blogger? I don't know. And she also mentions, you know, there's some potential there to reach their newsletter subscribers, their list of 12,000, which is great. So you could talk more about that as well. If there are more opportunities like this, they should be put into the plan. There's also earned media or relationships you have with the media. So this is where, have you been featured? Have you been on podcasts? Have you been a quoted expert? Can you be featured there again? You start listing them all. You can talk about the networks you're involved with, because these are very powerful for spreading the word. Remember, back to the memoirist who was writing about Tay Sachs, you know, she's affiliated now with a range of organizations because she's been doing advocacy work, and those organizations are going to be part of her marketing plan. So think about the organizations you belong to that tie into the themes or issues of the book. If you're teaching, talk about how many students you reach. If you're speaking, how big are the audiences? Do you have a lot of clients? Do you have a client mailing list, etc.? And then finally, the who you know part, I tend to call the VIP influencer segment, where you talk about who you know who will help spread the word. And some people actually include in their proposal actually advance praise. So people who are already willing to say this book is awesome or this author is awesome before the book is published. So think about who talks about what you do, who evangelizes for what you do, who recommends you, and can you work that somehow into the proposal? So I'm going to show you some screenshots of actual marketing and promotion plans because I think it's much easier to see what needs to be done with these tangible examples. And I'm very thankful to the writers who submitted these very thorough marketing plans. It's very impressive. This one is for the book proposal when you lose someone to addiction. And this is just the first 2 pages. She goes through her media appearances, her speaking engagements, the people she's interviewed for the book, which are always, it's good information to show because these people can be really instrumental in marketing and promoting the book when it releases. With the media appearances and the speaking engagements, these are all great because it shows a track record. It would be even better if we had an idea if she can go back to these places, if she still has relationships in these places. It continues. She talks about how she's a contributor to a book and she can network with other contributors to help promote her new book. She's been on lots of programs, radio, podcasts. She lists more personal connections, Facebook groups to which she belongs. Some of this, probably goes a little bit too far, and as far as even naming the, Embracing Life After Loss, 117 member group. But this shows you just how deep you can go into the marketing and promotion plan, showing all of the ways that you might have. You never know what might tip the scales for you, and so publishers like to see that you're already thinking in this way and have some things that you can take action on. For the Facebook group section in particular, I think it's helpful if you talk about if you're active or if you know the moderators or if there's something specific that you can do. Like, do those groups have live presentations or Q&As or other things that would be a fit for your book marketing and promotion? That would be additional helpful context. And then it keeps going with the organizations the author belongs to, cancer audiences. That's a stretch, but kudos to you for pulling out all the stops, and then at the very end, some social media links. But again, I think with social media, whenever you mention that, it's nice to talk about where you're active, but I think it's even better if you can be more descriptive about what you're doing with that platform, to give people a sense of how it could be utilized during a book launch. Here's another one. This is a book proposal for the No One Grows Up in Vegas memoir. This is a very different style of presentation than the other one we saw. The other one was like a really massive list of lots of different things going for volume. This is more discussion oriented. It's shorter, but extremely meaningful. And you get the sense from reading it that the author is really going to be able to do the things that she's talking about. So part of the marketing and promotion plan is, creating this credibility and authority, the sense that you're in a community that's going to help lift up the book. And that certainly comes through in this marketing plan. It continues, as you see here. She has a section for radio and podcast, a section for endorsers and allies. This is what I called VIPs or influencers. You can call them whatever makes sense to you. She mentioned synagogues, which makes a lot of sense because Tay-Sachs is prevalent in Jewish communities. All right, so the hardest part of the book proposal, in my opinion, is the overview. So the overview is kind of like the executive summary that comes at the very beginning. And we looked at some of these when we got started. And I think the marching orders here are either, does the overview tell a story that we're interested in, if it's narrative nonfiction or a biography, for example, or a memoir, or if it's more prescriptive, like, or a cookbook, something of that nature, does it define the reader and the reader problem? Now, you may have both, but usually you're picking one or the other depending on whether your book is a narrative or not. This overview that I'm showing you here was taken from the book proposal, Defeating Death. This is a children's biography of a doctor. And the overview was just it did not live up to the really interesting material that I found about this doctor elsewhere in the proposal and also online. So it would be really easy for an editor or publisher to dismiss this based on the overview alone. It also felt like the overview was maybe written like not recently, like maybe it was written closer to the time of when we were all in lockdown during COVID, because it talks a lot about COVID and pandemics. We've got Anthony Fauci mentioned there. And I don't really get much a sense of why this doctor, I understand he has accomplishments, but why do we want a whole book about him? Because he's connected to this topic in some way, but it's not made clear. So I did a little bit of research and I have refashioned the opening for this proposal. It's not the full opening, but it'll show you what you need to do instead, which is tell a story about this doctor, get us really intensely fascinated in this figure. And he is intensely fascinating. So in 1910, an unknown disease emerged that killed 99.9% of its victims in China, which is terrifying. The emperor needed an expert to investigate quickly before Chinese New Year celebrations. That's when everyone travels and gets together with family. And they sent Dr. Wu. Now, I may be getting my facts wrong. Please forgive anything that's incorrect here, author. I am so sorry, but I'm just trying to get my point across by taking some shortcuts here. So Dr. Wu quickly realized the disease was spread through the air. He developed a face mask that was more protective than any other at the time and saved countless lives. It is the forerunner of a mask we all now recognize today, the N95. Dr. Wu continued working to save people from pandemics of all kinds and lived a life filled with danger and adventure, as you would if you were battling pandemics without vaccines. He serves as a figure of hope, resilience, and empowerment. And then I don't know if there are other children's books about this figure, probably not, but you could say something like Defeating Death will be the first, whatever it is. Now this is not as long as the overview would need to be, but I think this shows, I hope, or it demonstrates the difference between like just talking about the book and then telling a story that's really going to draw us in, and see the importance of telling this story now. And what's going to get kids interested potentially. All right, so wrapping up, and then we're going to go to questions. The most common areas that need attention in the proposals I saw included the overview. So many people were just describing the book, the content, and not justifying why this book now by you. So that's what I call the business case for the book. Just describing the book does not make the business case. Then the audience or the readership. If the overview is doing its job, there's not going to be any surprises here. You're just going to elaborate on it. You still need it, even if the overview makes it clear who the audience is. I think the rule of thumb here when you're writing this section is, would this piece of information, would this description help you advertise wisely, meaning spend your money wisely, or specifically reach this readership? In other words, if you say this book is for people struggling with changes in their life, that does not help you advertise. What sort of changes are we talking about? What age group? So that's a starting point for how to hold yourself accountable for useful information that can be acted on to market and promote the book. Then you're going to include a marketing and promotion plan, 2 to 4 pages, double spaced. Longer is fine. Never aspirational, based on what you have in hand today. Your comparable title section, don't just list the titles, discuss them. And then I would break them out each into their own paragraph, where you list the title, subtitle, format, price, publisher, year, just, all the facts. We want to be able to see the publisher and price point and format kind of together, because it tells us something about the market for the book or the readership for the book. Just like the Rizzoli coffee table book, I knew immediately who that was for just by seeing the publisher and the price. So make it easy for people to scan that list. And then nobody typically wants to read a discussion of the book's themes, morals, lessons, etc., because it's just boring. So instead, focus on the benefit of the book, if it's a prescriptive book, especially, or the big picture argument that you're making, or the counterintuitiveness. So like for the burnout book, that would have been the fact that it's focused on neurodivergent people. And then finally, unless requested, most book proposals don't need a bibliography. You can save that for the published book. And a lot of people loved their footnotes. We don't typically see footnotes used in book proposals unless it's like for an academic press, or there's something about it where that's really important. It's much better to cite your sources as you go in line. rather than footnote them out. Again, the book proposal is a business document. You're not going to be graded on your footnoting. So I would just think twice before you decide footnotes are really required for the proposal. Okay. Before we dive into questions, I'm just going to give a little plug for the next free session. It's happening September 6th, so after the Labor Day holiday on a Friday, I believe. Yes, that's on a Friday. I'll be speaking with a writer whose newsletter growth has stalled, and she's wondering what to do about it. So we're going to dig into a very nice case study there. And if you're struggling with the same problem, I would encourage you to come. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to go over to the Q&A, and I'm just going to first, I'm going to look at the most upvoted questions, and then we'll go from there. But before I look at most upvoted, I just want to pause for a second and see if there's anything Mark wants to tell me.
No, you're absolutely fine just going to the most upvoted, because they're all kind of about platform. Everybody wants to know, is platform necessary? And I don't have the kind of platforms that I am seeing on the examples that you shared during the presentation. What do I do?
All right. So indeed, the first question is from Anne, who asks, are platforms still vital for most nonfiction? What if writers want to spend more time writing and social media can make many crazy? So unfortunately, there's not one size fits all answers to this. It's going to depend on the category of book. Also, if you're in a special position where you're able to write the book and very few other people can, which kind of gives you like just a quality that will make you attractive. And it depends on the size of the publisher. So I want you to think about those three variables. So the first variable is, I said it was like the type of book, right? I think. So if we're talking about a really heavily competitive category like cookbooks or self-help, yes, you're probably going to need a platform that is comparable to the ones that you see sitting on the shelf at your bookstore, if you want a Big Five publisher, if you want an agent. But maybe you don't need a Big Five publisher platform if you're willing to go with a smaller press, a university press in particular, because they're more interested in the quality of what you're bringing to the table. Like, is it well researched? Are you an authority? Do you offer expertise? Are you uncovering something that's really meaningful to your field or to this topic? So I'm like the Bill Withers book. It didn't look like those authors necessarily had the platform I would expect to be writing that biography, but maybe they do have like the expertise or the credibility or the authority for the sort of publisher that they're hoping will pick this up. So you have to look for a fit between you, the topic you're writing about, and the publisher or the type of publishing deal that you want to have. And the more you want the biggest deal possible or the biggest publisher possible, the more then you do have to give consideration to platform. But here's the good news. Social media is not platform. So if you are going to go out and build platform, the last thing I would say is go on TikTok or Twitter. Like, yes, that might work for you, but that is not where I would start. Think about the memoirist, Sarah, and the Tay-Sachs memoir. She is partnering with organizations. She's being an advocate. She's placing essays. These are all things that can be amplified by social media, but the fundamental activity is not social media driven. So she is doing what I would consider very meaningful work that supports her writing and supports her desire to have a book. So you can focus on things like, if you don't want to be social media oriented, you can focus on things like Substack. Some people might consider that social media too, but at least writing is at the core of that. You can think about podcasts, you can think about local and regional partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say go back to those marketing and promotion plans that I shared. And, often social media was a footnote in those marketing plans. So I just want to underline again and again and again, marketing and promotion is not about getting on social media and saying, buy my book, but it can help amplify the other efforts that you might be making. Elizabeth asks, will you please address narrative nonfiction? I'm unsure whether I should complete the manuscript first or the book proposal. I would prefer to write the book proposal first, but I'm not sure if that will be successful. So I would say the answer to this is really governed by two things. Your own expertise and publishing track record. Like if you're a really active journalist or essayist and you've done a lot of work that's visible, you're going to be better able to sell a book on the basis of a proposal. And then, gosh, I'm losing my thread here. So the two things, yeah, we're just going to say it's the one thing for now, unless the other one comes back to me. So they're going to look, it's about confidence in you. Oh, the other factor was, what does the agent or publisher require of you? Because they all have kind of varying submission guidelines, preferred materials that they want to receive. And some publishers may just want to see the manuscript up front, or they may be squeamish because of your expertise or background or experience. And they'd be like, we're not quite sure you're going to be able to pull this off. So we would rather you write the manuscript first. So you may end up with like conflicting responses on this question from agents and publishers themselves. I will say, though, that it's easier to bypass writing the manuscript first if your chapter summaries really knock it out of the park. So I would be spending more time on that for a narrative nonfiction book and making sure those summaries are really top notch and have cause effect going from chapter to chapter. Like we can see how the book is fitting together like a perfect puzzle and how one issue or topic leads into the next. And there might even be cliffhangers at the end of each chapter, that sort of thing. You want to show that you have really given a lot of thought to this structure, whatever it happens to be, whether it has cliffhangers at the end of the chapters or not. And then, of course, you have to at least write the sample chapter. So the sample chapter needs to showcase your best writing. And it's not necessarily going to be the first chapter. It could be something in the middle. You want to show the meaty part. You want to show what you can do. And so that's not the place to skimp, especially if you don't have the full manuscript complete. Sherry says, what if you're starting from scratch? Well, small steps. I mean, I would say, look at all of the different buckets you saw in those marketing and promotion plans. Pick one thing. Pick one thing to focus on. The one that appeals to you most, not the one that seems the hardest, not the one that's most popular. Pick the one that appeals to you most, that looks sustainable and like fun, and like you would probably do it whether or not it played a role in the book proposal or not. Because I find that that's actually when it tends to work, is when you have a genuine interest in it, apart from seeing it have that payoff. So in other words, it's about the journey, not the goal. So if you can manage to make that work, you usually, once you start one thing and it goes well, it then bleeds into those other things that you saw in the marketing and promotion plans. A question: for nonfiction that isn't narrative, is an agent actually necessary? No. It doesn't depend on whether your nonfiction is narrative. It depends on the size of the publisher. So if you're looking for a big New York publisher like Simon & Schuster, HarperCollins, Macmillan, et cetera, you need an agent. You really do, if you want to be considered by those places. There are some very large mid-size houses that will only look at agented submissions. But most university presses, independent publishers outside of New York City, they often have a path for you to submit, or they might have submission windows, like specific months of the year that you can submit your project. So it depends on the size of publisher, not the type of book. We've got a writer who's planning to send their proposal the second week in September. Is this an okay time to send, or is it in the summer dead zone? You should send it when you're ready. If the agent or publisher is open to submissions, send it. I do not believe in trying to game the system or time it perfectly, because there are far too many variables to account for. I mean, the agent or publisher might have had a bad day. You can't control that. Some big book might have sold that, has made everyone anxious about acquiring anything remotely like it. You can't control that. I fundamentally don't believe that the week of the year that you send it matters, as long as the agent or publisher is open to submissions. Harriet asks if the bio for the book proposal is best written in third person. I think that's the convention. It's usually in third. But I don't think anyone would necessarily have a problem if you wrote it in first, especially for memoir, that might feel more natural to you. So I would say you can go with your gut, but if you're not sure, then I would write it in third. Robert asks how important the platform or marketing plan overall is within the proposal. It's pretty important if you want an agent, if you want a big New York publishing deal, if you want a meaningful advance, or if you're in a competitive category where there's just lots and lots of people submitting proposals and the agent or publisher has the ability to select the person with the best platform. So one way to figure this out for those who aren't sure, obviously look at your comparable titles, look at those authors, look at their platforms. But for extra credit, I would also go to publishersmarketplace.com and look at recent deals in your nonfiction category and look up the authors before the book publishes. Look up the authors and see, do they have a website? Do they have a Substack? What's their social media following? Actually, I think you'd be surprised for some types of work. The platform isn't as big as you might think, assuming the person isn't already a celebrity, or a media, a career media person, like, the This American Life radio producer, a professional media person. There are a lot of so-called average people who get book deals all the time. It's just not necessarily with the big five houses. So researching those deals at Publishers Marketplace will help you get a better feel for how big your platform might need to be for the publisher that you're shooting for. Tom asks, on comparable titles, how do you address the problem that most of the comparables are crap or full of nonsense? Well, number one, I would never criticize the comp in that way in the proposal itself, even if you think that, because publishing is a very small world. Someone who receives your proposal may have had something to do with that book. And so it's not a good idea to go in guns blazing against the competition. You're absolutely allowed to point out its weaknesses or where it falls short, or talk about reader response to it in reviews or critical response to it, especially when you're trying to show why your book is needed in the market. Certainly, I would not advocate choosing comparables that just appear low quality when you have lots of high quality comps to talk about. So, there is a limit to how many comps you're going to discuss in the proposal. So if you can just lop off the ones that are low quality, you should. And I should also put a postscript on my whole comp discussion and say, if you're coming up with comparable titles that are predominantly self-published, that tells you something about the market for your book, that most people self-publish in that category, and there might be a reason publishers don't go there. Who knows what the reason is? It's going to differ by category. But if I don't know, Tom, if that's the reason you're finding a lot of low quality books, because people are really filling the category with like AI generated material, like in the travel category, that's very true. So if that's happening, then you just have to ignore the stuff that's really not relevant to your discussion with an agent or publisher. So comps, continuing that discussion, Don says, when querying multiple publishers, is it impossible? It's impossible to read 2 to 3 books that align with yours in the last 2 years. What is your advice? Keep digging, perhaps. It's hard to say in the abstract because I don't know what category you're working in, and I don't know how close of an alignment you're looking for. I would say that on average, when I talk to writers who are having trouble with comps, they're looking for too identical of a comp. So if I were writing a memoir, this is the example I always use. If I were writing a memoir about my publishing career in Cincinnati with a cat who has no teeth and a husband who I met while I was on the job, and my struggles to sleep at night, I'm not going to find a memoir that's going to tick all those boxes. And sometimes I do think people are going in looking for a comp that will in fact match on all those different levels. So you can't go in with that mindset. Instead, look for books that your target reader or your ideal reader, what have they bought? What are they likely to have read? And what does your book have in common with that? So you're kind of pointing at this is my readership. They're the people who really love this sort of book. An example here would be Catherine Bob McGuire. You can find her full proposal at my Business of Writing website. I'll ask Mark to try and link. If you could link to the resources page, you can find Kat's full proposal for free. She talks about how her book, Poe for Your Problems, is upmarket self-help. Well, you're not going to find another upmarket self-help book that's based on Edgar Allan Poe's life. That's too specific. But you can find all sorts of upmarket self-help books that are literary in nature. You can find Alan de Botton's How Proust Will Save Your Life. You can find other books comparable to that one that would appeal to the person who's buying Poe for Your Problems. So you might just need to change your idea of what a comp looks like. Nancy says, I'm writing my proposal. I have some experts in mind, but I hate to ask them to help me unless I have a contract. How do I go about outlining my plan to include them? So Nancy, I'm not sure if you mean you want to interview these experts or you want to blurb them, but either way, probably doesn't matter. Experts who are asked to blurb books or authors who are asked to blurb books to put into the proposal, they are so accustomed to that. If they're a published author, they're already going to know the battle you face. And if they like you or they trust you, if they know your work, they're likely going to be, prepared to give you something that for proposal purposes, and they're not going to hold it against you. If we're just talking about you're trying to reach out to an expert to do book research so you can talk about, oh, I've already reached out to all these people as part of kind of like, look at my authority, look at the research I've done. I personally am asked, as an example, all the time to contribute my expertise for someone's book research. For those of you who know Courtney Mom's book, Before and After the Book Deal, about a year before that came out, she asked me if I would get on the phone for 15 minutes to talk about a very specific issue about book advances, or no. How much does a literary novel sell? That's what we talked about. And that's in her book, if you go look for it. She was absolutely professional in approaching me. She had something very specific she wanted from me. Of course, she did have a book contract at that time, but even if she hadn't, I would have helped because that's in my nature. So there are certain experts who are going to be more open to that sort of involvement, and then others who might say no, but you do the best you can. And obviously, if you're really active and visible in your community on your topic, if people have heard of your name and they know because of your track record of publication or because of what you post on social media, if they already associate you with your book topic and your research, they're going to be that more inclined to say yes, because you're a known quantity. I think where the no's and the rejections tend to come in is when no one has ever heard of you, the expert hasn't heard of you, you come in out of the blue, they don't know you from Adam, and you're asking for a favor. And that's when things get very tough. So I would try to look for, if you need to, build up your community and your visibility to help make those requests more effective. But certainly Courtney Mom, whether she had a book deal or not, I knew who she was. I knew the places she had already published with. And so it just made it easy to say yes, because I knew she wasn't going to waste my time. Okay, so we're some minutes past where I promised we would end. So I'm going to let Nancy have the last question there. I know there are many more, but I hope this has been helpful for those of you working on a proposal. I know that I wasn't able to speak to every proposal, and I apologize. If I had, we would be here until way after dinner, but I really enjoyed looking at your projects. And even if I didn't comment on yours, I hope you got some feedback and a sense of what actually works in a proposal that you'll be able to apply to your next revision. So good luck with your proposals, and I look forward to seeing you again in another class. Bye-bye.